right. Welcome to the Stump, where I discuss various forestry issues, career and personal development, and anything else on my mind. I'm your host, Matt Comiskey. And today we are joined by former Washington State Commissioner of Public Lands, Hilary Franz. Hilary, Commissioner Franz, we'll go with the formal title to start with, served from 2016 to 2024, overseeing state trust lands, wildfire prevention and suppression, aquatic state lands, and much more at DNR. And so, Hilary, I'm glad you could join us.
It's great to be back online talking about the issues that matter so much. And thanks for having me.
I'm glad that we could finally get this scheduled. I know it was a little bit of a challenge, but we got it. But I think just to start, there may be listeners out there who don't know who Hilary Franz is. So just was kind of, a little bit of set the stage of a little bit about yourself, kind of, your career, how you ended up, why the Commissioner of Public Lands.
Right. Well, I don't think many people, when they're, growing up or aspiring to be the Commissioner of Public Lands, there's only 5 of us in the entire country, so we're pretty not well known. But, my background first, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I split my time between living Portlandia in real life in the city of Portland, where my father raised my sister and I, and also in Pierce County, where my grandparents had ranches and small forest lands. And as I say, I had probably the most unique childhood, where I spent half of my time in City Hall, literally, where my father worked as a public servant, and half of my time on a ranch outdoors. I also spent half my time really between a Democratic household, which is my father, and my Republican grandparents, which I think really sort of was some of the basic formation of who I am and my commitment to working across the aisle, working on natural resources issues, but also a diehard commitment to public service and government. I first started my career as an environmental land use real estate attorney, where most all of my cases were in the area of natural resource conservation and protection, from conserving working forest lands and farmlands at threat of conversion to protecting fish and wildlife. A lot of that's really where the foundation of my work is. A little known fact is my first case at a law school was actually become a precedential case out of the Washington State Supreme Court in preventing the conversion of agricultural lands. And my client ran out of money and paid me in sheep.
Wow. Well, that's
very true. And when you're given 3 sheep and one's pregnant, 3 sheep become 12 sheep. And when the next thing I knew, I was buying a small farm, and, one boy became 3 boys, and raised them on a very small farm in a very small house, where we really were, for me, it was about making sure my kids were as connected to the land, and the land that feeds them, not only their spirit and their soul, but also their bodies. I was able to continue the lessons my grandparents taught me as ranchers. And also, that was the place where I first ran for public office as a city council member. And the worst time you could ever run for office, which was 2007, where you promised everything to your constituents. And in 2008, budget with the recession was cut in half, and you pretty much couldn't make any of your promises come true unless you actually worked really, really hard. It's where I fell in love with local government and the importance of it, and how hard it is too for local governments to serve the communities.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can understand the local government. You're right there. You're kind of close to the ground. The dirt. You can affect things. But what was the inspiration for Commissioner of Public Lands?
So that was an interesting, again, my background being in the issues around local government and local communities, the importance of natural resource lands that once lost, you can never get them back again. And when the Commissioner of Public Lands position opened up pretty rapidly in 2016, when the previous commissioner, Goldmark, chose not to run, there was about 6 months to run statewide for the general election. And for me, I think the biggest thing, this is actually it was really the full coming of circle of all the things from my childhood to my work in environmental land use and real estate law, and then local government. We were at a magnitude, I think, in the moment when climate change and its impacts were really presenting themselves in Washington State. 2014 through 2016, we saw the catastrophic wildfires where 1 million acres burned in 2015. Was really seeing sort of the impacts on our environment, air, water, soils, fish and wildlife. And we also were seeing the struggles of our natural resource lands and economy as we were seeing continued sprawl and conversion. I think the value of the Commissioner of Public Lands is it brings all those together. It's that context that our land use is essential to mitigating climate change and making our lands, waters, and communities more resilient from where we live, where our food, our water, our shelter, and energy comes from. The Department of Natural Resources and the Commissioner of Public Lands are responsible for, really setting, in my mind, the direction of where we go in our state. This is a state where it talks a lot about climate change and being a state that's leading in climate change. And I'll just be frank, in 2016, we were very, very far behind, and we are still behind. That really propelled me in the role of Commissioner of Public Lands to run. We had no true plan for how we're going to drastically reduce carbon emissions. We still don't. We have no plan for how we're going to make our communities, our environment, our economies more resilient to a rapidly changing climate. Wildfires, dying forests, drought, dust storms, ocean acidification, sea level rise. And Department of Natural Resources and the Commissioner of Public Lands, who leads it, is a special agency that is truly on the front lines of these issues in the most urban areas and the most rural areas. Because it has the responsibility of leading the wildfire response for the state, managing and stewarding 6 million acres of aquatics, forest, agricultural, commercial, industrial, and residential lands, in the biggest of cities and the most rural of places. As I always say, Department of Natural Resources is triple bottom line organization where it has a responsibility to the state's environmental well-being, its community's well-being, because it's funding so much of the basic health, housing, human services, public safety, education, and also a huge responsibility to the state's economic well-being. And I really felt like it was an opportunity for the state to start to put itself on the path of having a clear plan, but also, most importantly, implementing a plan, right? It's a lot of thought is great, but if you're not doing anything about it, then you're not going to create the transformation. And so that is why I run. And it's still to this day, the greatest honor I've ever had next to raising my 3 boys.
Well, no, that's good, and you're right. I think one of the key things was there was a lot of stuff in the forest health wildfire space. It was kind of starting to have conversations, but that 20-year forest health plan, getting that finished, and then the hard part is implementing. It was kind of a bit of a challenge. So, I think I'm thinking back to when you first came into office and some of the things that you were working on, but I think you kind of laid out kind of your initial goals. I remember the Rural Community Partnership Initiative, some of the other forest health stuff. Was that those were, boy, I don't know. See, this is where sometimes my brain just locks up. Were those kind of some of the initial ideas you had when you came into office, or were those kind of more like, you're here, you kind of see, now what do we do?
So, traveling the state during the campaign, 6 months, I was in every corner of the state. And even if, there were communities that I knew may not vote for me, just because we are a divided state, it was really important for me to be on the ground in those communities and hearing what the greatest challenges were and the greatest opportunities, and how, as Commissioner of Public Lands and the State Department of Natural Resources, we can help serve. That 6 months was huge because it gave me a real clarity around the most urgent, pressing things we have to address right now. When I came into this role, I'll be honest, there was significant amount of things that had been put off for a very long time, like the Habitat Conservation Plan, 25 years of kicking the can down the road, right? Forest health, we had millions of acres burn already. And we had no forest health plan. We had one person in the agency to do forest health and was a policy position, which we all know policy is one thing, but you have to have the resources, tools, funding, everything. Our wildfires significantly underfunded. Our budget was zero every year. We had 8 Vietnam War helicopters and 40 full-time firefighters, right? And I got in and I
I
go,
think a couple of those helicopters actually weren't even certified to carry buckets underneath, but they were.
Yep. That's true. And it had bullet holes. Yep. I mean, it was so like you walk in and you're like, wow, the value of this agency and organization, the work that the people of this agency are some of the most passionate, hardworking, tenacious people I know who care about the lands and waters and communities. And yet they had so little funding and so much things that had just been put off and delayed. What I knew is I had to really, if I focused on 25 things at once, I'd probably fail on all 25 things. And so I really prioritized what was the most important thing we could not fail on right up in the very beginning, right? And so obviously wildfire is going to be front and center in that because we have so many communities whose lives are at stake, their properties at stake. We have forests that are burning that obviously impacts our economy and our environment. And so I really focused on wildfire and our wildfire response. I focused on not just being reactive and running from one fire to the next, but also saying we got to get the root cause of the issue and restore our forest. And so developed a wildfire strategic plan in my first 18 months, developed a forest health plan in my first 8 months, even though we had nobody, like no staff and resources really to do it. And then in addition to that, really recognize that one of our biggest challenges is that we are truly leaving so many of our communities behind, especially our rural communities, that these are the communities that are providing our food, our water, our shelter, our energy, right, that we depend on, and we are not working with them to make sure they're resilient to the different environmental, economic, and social challenges that they've been facing for decades. So it's also about investing in the infrastructure and the people in those communities.
Yeah, and I think that's an ongoing challenge. You know, we see we're not going to tackle the executive orders right now that came out over last weekend, and this is being recorded on March 7th, just so that folks know which last weekend we were talking about. But yeah, you know, there's a lot of interest around rural economies, and I feel like in many ways we're still kind of forgetting about that. But hopefully, you know, we'll shift that focus a little bit. So, you know, coming in, obviously, those of us in the timber industry were a little cautious, some scared, some worried, probably some of the Republican and maybe even some of the more centrist pro natural resource management Democrats were probably a little cautious. Do you see kind of trying to bridge those gaps as your biggest challenge, or did you have other challenges when you first came into the role as commissioner?
Oh
And
my
how
God.
did you work on those challenges?
Yeah. So I'm well, okay, I'll start with the sort of just the political personal piece, right? And then we can talk about the substantive things. You know, I am a big believer. So I did not come in believing that I was the wildfire expert. In fact, I wasn't. I knew nothing about wildfire. My kids would say I couldn't even put out a kitchen fire and shoot. They're right. I didn't know anything about how little resources we had in wildfire and what were all the barriers, legal, statutory, funding barriers. And so I very quickly realized I couldn't fail on this one thing that is so important about saving lives and saving our state. And so I did, what I think most people would do or should do, which is I went, to the communities and to the leaders that actually knew, how big the problem was, what were the barriers and what were the challenges. And that meant I went and spoke. I went to largely rural Eastern Washington that didn't vote for me. And I'm all good with that. I went to them and said, look, I'm here to listen and I'm here to learn. And then I will lead. You can't really truly be a great leader unless you've really listened to all the people that understand and know the issue, but also that are most impacted by those issues. And so before I was even sworn into office on January 11th, 2017, I actually got in a car and drove through a snowstorm. One of my favorite stories, which I have to tell because I really see how divided our state is and how divided our country is. And I really don't believe, I know people want to say that's impossible or you can't work across the aisle. It's impossible. You can't work across the political divide, the rural urban divide. And I truly believe that's a false theory. And the more we say that is the case, the more we're failing ourselves and we are failing our children and the next generation in our own communities. And so, first thing I did was during committee November, I went and spent my time actually meeting with the Republican legislators. I knew that our agency and the work we do impacted their communities the most. I knew I didn't know very much about their communities and I didn't know much about the issues that their communities were facing. I think my favorite moment, which people know this story, but if you have, maybe your listeners don't, which is, I went to go meet with Representative Joel Kretz out of Okanagan County, longtime representative rancher, and he was there during the Carlton complex. He watched as communities were burning down, the lands were burning, and he couldn't get resources. And he saw as the forests were also been dramatically changing over decades that are leading to these catastrophic fires. And he told before I walked in, he told my staff person, well, I'll let her talk and then I'll kill her. And, most people that might create fear, that just creates a good challenge for me. And so I was like, all right, talk fast. I'm good at that. And just try to buy some time for another day. But I went in and I said, look, I immediately said, I don't know much about your communities. I don't know about much the crisis they're facing economically or environmentally. I don't know much about wildfire, but I'm here to learn. I come from ranching background, similar to you. And I'm a big believer that we don't have time to waste, and I will do everything possible to fix this problem if you will give me the time for me to learn from you. And then I spent an entire day with him out on the ground, seeing the devastating impacts of those fires, looking at forest health treatment. This is like 5 days before Christmas in 2016, where I really saw it with my very own eyes, the difference between a fire rolling through that Carlton complex in an area that had been completely untreated, forest unmanaged, to stopping right at a line where the forest health treatment had happened, where literally the forest stopped the fire. And that, honestly, seeing is believing, seeing is understanding, right? And it was at that point I said to him, I will do everything in my power to change the course we're on. I promise you, I will not fail you and I will not fail your community. And not only, I think what was amazing by that is that this state is so much farther along in 8 years. And frankly, I go to Europe next, actually this month, as a keynote for the International Wildfire Conference. We become an international national leader in Washington State over these 8 years. And I couldn't have done it alone. It's impossible. Not only did I need the amazing people at the Department of Natural Resources, but I needed people outside that were willing to give me their time, their thought leadership, their experience, and honestly, their support and encouragement and having my back, because it's not always easy to create change.
Yeah. So first off, was the visit to the ranch?
The visit was not to the ranch that time.
Oh, okay.
It was in Wakanda.
Mm-hmm.
And then, oh my God, it was such a great, it's just like, this is why, like, afterwards, it's like massive snowstorm. It's coming down. I got 6 hours to get home, right? In the dark of night. And Joel said, he goes, hey, can you get dinner with me? And I was like, looking at, the long drive over the weather. I'm like, okay, yes, I can. And I sat down and had a burger, and he said to me, he goes, Hilary, you are the first statewide elected that's actually come to visit me in my own community. The very first one. You're the first one that's asked to see the devastation. You're the first one to ask for my advice and thoughts. And from that, not only did we go make amazing things happen and transform the sort of trajectory of the state, but He's truly one of my best friends. My kids have been to the ranch. I go to the ranch. I go to his, annual sale. And I probably, before I die, will buy one of his horses. I just need to go find my ranch at this point. So
Yeah, he does have some beautiful horses, and that driveway is an interesting challenge, I will say.
it, it is a very interesting, and especially in the snow, which I did not do.
Yeah, fortunately, I didn't do it in the snow. It was awfully cold and a little bit of ice in
Yeah.
places, but and I was in a rental car, so that made it a little bit more dicey. But no, I think that's really important. Actually, is for folks to get out and especially elected officials, especially at that statewide level. And I know that the relationship between the agency and some of the other Eastern Washington representatives, maybe a little further south from Representative Kretz's area, without outing any names, probably could have been a little bit better if there had been more dialogue. I was in the middle of a few of those back and forth conversations with staff from your predecessor, and certain legislators, where it's like, why can't we test this large aerial tanker dropping water over state trust lands, those type of things. And it's like, I'm a guy trying to get logs into sawmills. Why am I in the middle of aerial tanker testing debates? But I think it's that getting out that's important. And we didn't see a certain governor go to Forks when they lost their last major sawmill, and and I think that sends a message to those counties too, and or those communities that does anybody really care? And I think you getting out there shows that you did care about them, and that you wanted to make change and find solutions.
Can I add some on this? I think you and I are gonna have a multiple podcast because I don't think we're gonna be done. Like
Oh no,
I know.
part two sounds great.
I would do it. You get part 3, part 4 until you get tired of hearing from me. But there's a couple things here I'll say. Where do I start? So first, relationship is everything. Relationship is everything. We have so many challenging problems throughout our state and our country, from housing and mental health, to public safety, to climate change, to economic and natural resource management, and all those pieces that you and I've talked a lot about. And it's really hard to truly be able to solve those, especially at a statewide level, unless you have the connection to the people on the ground who are living and breathing and experiencing it, whether it's on the economic side or the wildfire crisis or housing. And I realized and knew very early on that I can't be in every corner of the state 24/7, but that the work that we do, because the lands we manage is in every single county of the state, and the natural disasters we're responding to are in every part of the state, that if I could really build that relationship with every legislator in the state, here's my number. If you need anything, I don't care if there's a fire in your backyard, which, trust me, I have gotten those calls from legislators like, I have a fire in my backyard, I need help now. I get those like every year in the middle of the night, right? To the ones that are like, hey, we have a permit that is stuck. And I remember because I managed geology, and we had a gravel mine permit. And I got a call from a legislature because I gave my cell phone out to every one of them and said, look, I got a guy here, he's going to have to lay off 50 people before Christmas if this permit doesn't come through. And he goes, and we don't know where it's at. And I go, let me find out. I make a call. My person says, oh yeah, I've got it all figured. It's all done. It's been done. It's just on my desk. I just got pulled into this and this and this and this. And I was like, great, it's all done. Can you send it out? And boom, within 30 minutes. Now, I look like an amazing hero. I'll just say that. And my agency looks like a great hero, but really it was because we just didn't know. And so those legislators, they are the eyes and ears on the ground. That connection helped me be a better leader for the people of the state of Washington. It also helped my agency be able to respond more quickly and efficiently and effective and fix things that might be broken or turbocharge things that are really working. I think the other thing that relationship helps is too often agencies that are removed from that local don't really realize or have the full sense of connection to the full suite of systems, right? So you and I both know that if I have hundreds of thousands of acres of forests on federal, state, private lands in central Washington that are dying and many dead already that lead to these catastrophic wildfires, and I need to go in and do that forest health treatment, but I don't have a mill anywhere in sight, that it's over 5+ hours to get to it, that it's going to cost me money to do that forest health treatment, which is going to come from the general funds, right? Versus being able to actually make money. And for every mill that goes out because it doesn't have wood products from state and private lands, what's going to happen is you're now going to see the undercutting, not only the health of forest, but you're going to see the conversion of forest, right? In my role, I understood that full system and that I can't just be removed from it, making global large decisions for the state without really understanding what's happening in the community when it comes to workforce housing, when it comes to jobs and training, when it comes to the infrastructure needed to support the larger system. And honestly, that's what truly helped. It's one of the great parts of, frankly, the Department of Natural Resources. I think a lot of people, go, wow, that agency has a lot going on. And I was honestly, what's amazing about the agency of the Department of Natural Resources, because we have this constitutional responsibility to manage and steward 6 million acres of land that funds basic services and education, hundreds of millions, we are actually an economic driver and a business. So it enables us to walk in the shoes of small and large businesses throughout our state in a different way than most government agencies do. I mean, we were impacted by tariffs back in, not the recent ones we'll get to,
Yep.
but the ones back in 2019, right? We are one of the largest shellfish producers, and we're also lease our aquatic lands to shellfish. COVID impacted us because we own a hotel and hotel was shutting down, right? Jobs and workforce development, if I don't have the people that are trained to do forestry or firefighting, we face struggles in hiring people when we didn't have affordable housing in our urban areas as well as our really rural areas. I already told the example of when mills close. I'll have to throw this on because I know you like to talk about trees and wood, but I like to also talk about wine. I mean, we're one of the largest wheat producers and vineyard producers. And Red Mountain, if you like wine, Red Mountain is one of the most amazing areas for growing grapes and producing some of the best wines of Washington State. We weren't growing any grapes on DNR lands. There was making zero money for our communities until a grape processing facility went in, right? And now all of a sudden our land became valuable for something, right? And so did adjacent land. DNR has the ability to understand that full system of the kinds of infrastructures, resources, and capacities that are needed to make sure we can thrive and meet our responsibility. And that helps our communities be stronger and more resilient, and our economies and our environment.
I can't disagree. I mean, and I think that it takes somebody takes a leader who's willing to get out there to try to help connect all those dots. And I guess, what is it like running an agency like DNR? Because I mean, you're right. It is a part for-profit business, land management business. I think in kind of my notes, I put down timber business, but you're right. There's the agricultural, the commercial side, but you're also a firefighting agency, and you're also a regulator, and also a landlord for the aquatic state lands that, doesn't really generate, it's more to generate economic activity in the private sector, not necessarily, generating revenue for a trust. And then you've got this whole interaction with federal agencies and all of that. So it's got to be a little bit of a challenge. Well, so I mean, what is it like?
Not challenging at all. I mean, just a walk in the park. I would say to you, here's what I loved about the agency the most. If anybody who knows me, I am not, slow is not my middle name. Right? I mean, I'm like, we have a finite amount of time on this planet. We can't waste a moment. We should be making every single day count to make the world better, from our environment to our communities to our economy. And what is so great about the Department of Natural Resources is it's an organization, an agency of action. It really is an agency of action. I mean, you start from wildfire. We don't sit back with a kind of going, this is a tough thing. See that fire over there? I don't know. Let's all form a task force and an advisory committee, and let's all talk about what we're going to do about it for a while. No, we're like, holy bleep, we got to go put the fire out. Whatever we got to go do it, right? So it's already has this sense of immediate action. But then on top of it, the people come there, they want to be managing those forests to be able to sustain them intergenerationally, and meet the needs of that community, because their kids go to school in those communities, their kids and their families go to the healthcare services and public safety, all those, they understand it. And so and then when you look at the fact of a rapidly changing climate, a rapidly changing economy, and rapidly growing communities, there is this sense of we have no time to waste. We must meet the ever-growing needs of our communities and our environment now. I think, and so we're a community of doers. We're a community of action oriented. We're a community of not wringing our hands, but getting to work and getting on the dirt and on the ground or in the air to do it. I think the other thing that's so great about the mission of the agency, besides the fact that we literally are walking in the shoes of small and large businesses in almost every single category, to the fact that we are have that sense of urgency and drive, from the wildfire response to the urgency that our communities have for those revenues, to the context of the local economies and state economy depend on our work so much. There's also this larger context that I think makes us really special, which is that, the agency has this constitutional responsibility to fund critical services for communities, right? Education, health, housing, human service, public safety. And having come from local government where I served and know how hard the job gets with fewer resources every year, larger demands and less resources to do it every year, that urgency and importance was not missed on me, and it is certainly not missed on the people of the agency. And this sense that because we have a responsibility to do this intergenerationally, we don't have a short-term lens. Yes, we have the immediate needs these communities have right now and the immediate threats from economic and environment. But we also have this responsibility to think 25, 50, 100 years from now. We have to be looking and trying to understand, how is our environment going to change from drought and forest health to wildfire, sea level rise, and what does real resiliency look like to meet that responsibility? We have to look at how our communities are going to change. Sprawl, the need for more water. So shouldn't our agency be working to put more water into our public trust? That was one of the things I championed. Oh my gosh, we need to be building housing on our urban land so they're not sprawling outside onto our forests and farmlands. And so we're actually meeting the needs that community has in a double-pronged way, not just through funding, but actual built environment. To the context of diversifying funding sources, right? That we can't just put all our eggs in the basket of forestry and agriculture. We have to look at the diverse needs and also diverse revenues, because we're going to have down times again, like we did during the recession. And then if I could just add were you gonna?
No, I was just gonna go ahead with your thought there, and then I'll jump in. So
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that I think that was so special about us is that, too often, and we see it more and more, we operate, our lens of the world and what we operate in is just shrinking. It's actually getting smaller and smaller. This is my community. This is my home. This is how I believe. This is my needs, right? When really we need to be expanding that so that we're seeing the values that we provide, but also the values we receive from others that aren't like us and don't live where we are. And what was great about our agency is we were able to really sort of develop and plan strategies that recognize the larger value that we have and responsibility. That is, we should be looking at how do we, over the next decade, ensure that we have enough water that's going to meet the needs of the people of Washington State, and how can the DNR help in that role? How do we make sure we have enough food to truly be at resilience, that we can meet the needs of our community by expanding and increasing our agriculture production? Same with wood. We should be growing our wood portfolio, our forest land portfolio, as we see more and more importance of being more reliant and sustainable for us. And the same as with energy. And DNR, because of its broad mandate and mission, has the ability to do that.
I can't disagree. And I think that that's one thing that, I don't know, as you well know, I get to deal with a lot of the naysayers that don't like anything that DNR does. And, I think you're right. That's one thing that I think natural resource management professionals in general tend to look at the long range. And so they're willing, or they understand that there's short-term costs, there's long-term costs, and to meet society's needs and goals, you got to try to find that sweet spot. And and I think one thing that makes DNR unique is, as you said, the staff live and work in these communities. That when I worked for DNR, and it was back in the Commissioner Goldmark days, that was what made the trust mandate very real to me. Was I will never forget this, the day that there was a knock on the door at the Menlo Work Center down in Pacific County, and in walks a Willapa Valley School Board member wanting to speak to the local unit forester because he wanted to know where the school district's check was for that month, because it didn't show up and they were expecting it. And so, that was very real for me when you got a school board member walk into your work center and say, where's the revenue that you guys owe us? You said you're going to produce it. We got bills to pay. We got fuel to put in the buses. We got a roof to fix on the bus garage. So, I think that that's one thing that probably makes DNR unique, is that, unlike a larger, especially publicly traded company where, you're working for shareholders, your shareholders are your next door neighbors. They're not somebody that owns X amount of stock on a stock exchange someplace. So I think that's one thing that really helps make DNR unique, and just, the broad reach that it has. And then I think your comments around relationships is important. I mean, I don't think House Bill 1168 would have gotten anywhere without, relationships. And, I think that was to me was a good example of not only working across party lines, but working across, all sorts of different sectors, whether that's the forest products sector or the wildfire side of things. So, oops, I think you're on mute. Did you mute yourself?
That would be rare. That would be rare. Has Hilary ever muted herself?
No, probably not. But every once in a while, I know I hit some weird button, I mute myself. But I think that relationship part, I think, is key. I mean, heck, even getting urban legislators to weigh in and help support that was unique. And I think you're right. If you spend time out walking through all the thousands of acres of these burned forests, I don't know how anybody could say you don't have something to do. That something has to change.
So you brought up, I think there's a couple things in there. First, agency. I think it is a great thing that Department of Natural Resources is really in every single one of these communities and actually does understand its challenges. Like Wakayakum, right? One of our timber zones alone exceeds their entire operating budget that year. I mean, right? That shows you how important it is that our management of those forests now and in the future for them is so key to providing, and especially where that community doesn't have a robust economy. I mean, one of the bulbs that went off in my head the very first 6 months was King County, the largest, most, sort of most revenue of any county state. We were like Department of Natural Resources was 0.08% of their operating budget. That's it, 0.08% of their operating budget. Like, we were a blip. If we vanished, we're important for keeping mills in the area, and it's good to always continue to have sustainable wood supply. We also have land in downtown Seattle. We could be generating more revenue, right? But we are a blip in the budget. And yet, in many of our rural counties, right, we're 40% of their entire operating budget. And there's no backfill. They can't go, oh, I'll bet Amazon wants to come build some more, high rises in Wahkiakum, right? They don't, or Skamania, where 80% of their land base is federal and state land. Their tax revenue base is so tiny, right? And it is important for people to realize we used to be 80% of their operating budget. And then it just shrunk to 40%. And there was no real backfill. There was no saying, wow, we're going to take this off limits and take that revenue for you, but we're going to find a way to pay you back, or we're going to help make sure we are providing that foundation your community needs for public safety and roads and health and human services. And the great thing about Department of Natural Resources is we know that. We know it because our people live in that community, our people have the relationships with that community, and we feel a huge sense of responsibility to not walking away, but instead fixing the things that we have not done right and making sure we're setting those communities up on a long-term trajectory that enables them to have great education, great health and human services, great public safety, and all the great services that everyone truly deserves and needs. I think that's huge. I think, it's interesting. I was talking to, you brought up House Bill 1168, which, I think, I can have you ask a question you were going to ask, but it sort of blew me away when I came in, the urgency of the work we do, the importance of the work that we do to everyone, and the lack of resources and funding for the work we do.
Yeah, and that's going to be a point of discussion when the budgets roll out of the state legislature here this session. Well, let's see here. We both have other things on our schedule for the rest of the day. So
I just freed up till 1:30, so you can cut me off when you want. But
all right.
So I have a little more time, so you're good.
So what do you see as really your most significant success as commissioner?
Oh gosh, I mean, I think the most obvious one that is sort of especially, right now as we're getting ready for another fire season. But I would say for sure the work, in truly setting up an entire structure and foundation for wildfire response, forest restoration, and community resilience. I mean, South Carolina is experiencing wildfires. That was just this last week. Nobody can forget what happened in LA just 2 months ago. Before that, New Jersey, Brooklyn, Texas, the list goes on. State after state, including Washington State, is now facing these catastrophic wildfires that are going, that no one is immune from. No urban environment, no rural environment, no state. And, when I walked into the agency in 2017, we were on the heels of the fires of 2014 through 2016, 1 million acres burned. Our agency, Department of Natural Resources, DNR, stood for Do Not Respond, Do Not Resuscitate. I don't think you could have a worse brand if your job was wildfire response and saving lives. And it was not a fair assessment or description of the people of our agency and how much they cared and how hard they work and how determined they were to. It's just that we didn't have the resources. And the same was true with forest health. I mean, you've been living in these forests for a lot longer than I have. You understand how they've been changing. And it's been pretty dramatic that those changes were happening decades ago. It's been over time expanding and growing and reaching more forests, but we had no system in place on our own state lands, let alone federal and private and tribal lands of restoring these forests. And we had zero efforts going into actual community resilience of how do we harden our homes, our neighborhoods, and our communities. And when I look back, I sort of look back and go, wow, we built this amazing program over a period of time. And I think if I can provide any insight, like the first thing I always say is we had no roadmap. I mean, CAL FIRE is the only example in this nation, and CAL FIRE built their system in the 1930s and has a budget that is the envy of countries. You know,
Yes.
right?
Yep. Yeah.
That we will
I always think
never
CAL
be
FIRE is nice, but we can't afford that model right now.
CAL FIRE, right? So in a way, I look back and go, wow, how did we do that? We had to build a model, a roadmap, and a plan for a state that is right now has to be responding to wildfires, but couldn't just go open a book off the shelf in our universities and say, here's how you do it, you know, right? And the first thing I started with was we should never go to the legislature and ask for money if we don't have a plan, if we don't know what the problem is, how big, and what are the strategies and solutions that need to be implemented, right? And so the first thing I did was like, we're going to develop a forest health plan. We're not just going to be reactive. Government is so much about react, oh, another crisis, react, another crisis, react, without ever being like, what is how we are proactive and get in front of this while we're still putting the fires out so we can reduce these fires over time and our forests can fight these fires on their own eventually. And so we right away, 8 months, built this plan, AFRC, timber industry, local communities, fire districts, environmental community, all came together, 33 organizations to say, this is something we have to do. We can't afford to waste more time. We built that plan, wrote it in a statute so the legislature couldn't forget about it, had a sense of responsibility to do it. And then began building an entire forest resilience program. And to be honest, I'm a big competitive person. So I was like, I said to my team, who's number one in this country on forest health right now? And I was told Idaho, and I go beat them. Go beat them. That's all I asked you to do. Number one. I said, we're going to be measuring our impacts. Too often, you know, a statute passes, funding comes, and nobody's tracking the outcomes and the outputs and the results. I said, build a tracker. We're going to be tracking it. So the public knows where our money's going. They know it's being effectively utilized and we're getting results. On forest health alone, I remember when the 2020 fires came, which I have to talk about just because that was the biggest game changer for Washington State. But I remember, 600,000 acres burned in 72 hours, right? 56 fires in 24 hours, hurricane force winds. And I remember turning to my team, Dwayne and Todd and Trevor, and I said, and George, and I was like, we are doubling down. We're going to reach our 20-year plan in 10 years. We do not have time to waste. We have to move at the pace and scale of wildfires. I mean, I think there was a pretty large pause and significant, but we're on our way to doing it. We now 900,000 acres restored in just 7 years. I think on the wildfire, if I can just give you that piece so that's the forest resilience work that we built literally from scratch with nothing. And thanks to AFRC and, your guys' work and push and help, it's been huge, not only on legislation, but funding and then implementation too. The wildfire response. I mean, this is really why it comes down to listening. We had huge barriers and challenges. I mean, the first thing I realized is we had $0 in our budget. It's really hard to plan and fight wildfires with $0. And I realized that also, we didn't have a good brand. Like, why should the legislature, if we're known as do not respond, do not resuscitate, whether it was fair assessment, we weren't going to get any money and resources. And I knew we had no time to lose. So the first question I went out to local fire chiefs and fire districts and firefighters and local community members and legislators who were on the front lines of those fires and said, what do we need to do? And they're like, initial attack, initial attack, initial attack, which is and I was like, John, okay, I only have 8 Vietnam War helicopters. The moment smoke is in the air, I said, you guys are going to fly. You're going to fly. And if I find out you're not flying, you're going to be in a different job. And immediately within that first year, those planes, moment smoke was in there, the planes were flying. We pre-positioned them so they didn't have travel time, because time is everything in a fire, where those fires could be. And immediately, and then we began training local, state, and federal firefighters together to build a more cohesive team. And immediately within 1 year, just the communication at the local level was like, wow, there's something different happening at DNR. And then began working to get resources, which was not easy at all, as you know.
Oh, yeah. Continuing to be not easy.
Not easy. Well, it's at first. So, I began, and I think this is one of the areas where my legal background really helps is, so I began drafting House Bill 1168. I mean, like that was really important. The first 2 years, I kind of failed on a funding mechanism. Sometimes you might think it's an ideal funding mechanism, but if you can't get the support for that funding mechanism, it doesn't mean you should just keep on with that same. It means you need to sort of say, hey, look, at the end of the day, time is everything, and I don't have any more years to waste. We have got to get these resources. I need to be more inclusive of bringing greater thought leadership in and more diverse people, and Republicans and Democrats to help me identify the best funding mechanism for it. And that was House Bill 1168, one of the largest, I'd say, cohesive team of the most diverse people who were supporting that bill and moving it forward, that passed unanimously out of the House and Senate. AFRC and timber was huge in it. So was insurance, so was environmental community, so was, American Lung Association and many others, fire chiefs, firefighters for sure. That bill I think is one that is a massive legacy, obviously, for the state for once putting in the investment that's needed, that the more you're spending up front in wildfire response and in forest restoration, and community resilience, the more you will save on the back end. I mean, I think LA is now a very big example of this, and you look at the dollar cost. You can also see what this last year, I mean, let me add 2 things that, first, that beside, a lot of people talk about House Bill 1168, which has been huge because you have to have the infrastructure on the ground and in the air for fighting wildfires, and you have to be proactive in helping our communities and our forests become more resilient to the fires. There is also a number of other things that happened that people don't know about that I think have been the most transformative for our wildfire response piece, which is, after the Labor Day firestorm 2020, I mean, that was probably the biggest test of my leadership, of all hell breaking loose. We had 600,000 acres burn in 72 hours. We had the small town of Malden burned to the ground, 80% of the buildings lost and homes. I lost my first civilian on my watch, 1-year-old boy, as his family tried to outrun. And that was a true wake-up call for how fast these fires can burn, how many areas they're going to burn, and how we are still so under-resourced. We didn't have House Bill 1168 at that moment. We had our aviation resources were call when needed contracts, meaning if your house is on fire right now, you call 911 and you're going to expect them to come because you pay your local fire district levy rate, right? And we thought the same thing. The problem is Oregon and California were also on fire with these catastrophic wildfires with the hurricane force winds. And we were repeatedly told, when we said, we need more planes, we need more planes, we need more firefighters, we need everything you got. We were told, you don't have enough values at risk. Because when multiple states are on fire and the situation is dire, they go to an analysis or assessment of how many lives at risk. And Washington State, our fires were still in less populated areas compared to Oregon, California. That was the biggest wake-up call I had, not only on why we need 1168 and that I'm going to fight to the death to get it, but also on a change in how we do our contracts with aviation. The next year, I said, I'll never do a fire season like that again. And we moved our aviation contracts to exclusive use, one of the first states in the nation to do this, right? Where it now meant that we had them under our control. And so when we needed them, we could have them. When we don't need them, we lease them out and make the money back. Alaska, BC, Texas last year, right? That has been the most significant change, coupled with 1168, of being able to always have those resources. So last year we had 44 air resources. We had just 300,000 acres burned. We had almost the same number of fires as Oregon, but Oregon had 1.9 million acres burned. They were begging for air resources.
And no exclusive use contract.
None. Zero. And when people say, what are you worried about in the future? There's lots I worry about in the future, but one is like, we built now a program. We still have a long ways to go to get out of the woods on these wildfires. We now had more fires west of that Cascades than east of the Cascades in 2023. We're going to see more wildfires, but we have built a foundation and we built a strategy that is working, and we can't go back, even as we have budget deficits and concerns about because we will pay in lives and in property and our economy and our environment if we make a mistake. I think the last thing, and again, this is why it is so important that we work across the aisle, that we go to the places and work with the people that may not look like us or live in communities like us. The bill that I did with Representative Dent, House Bill 1498, was another game changer. It was a matter of just changing 10 words. That now, instead of when a local fire district needs aviation resources, they used to have to make 5 to 6 calls before they get those resources. And sometimes 5 to 15 to 24 hours would go by, which you and I both know is the difference between a 10-acre fire and a thousands of acre fire. Now it's a simple thing. You call and say, I need DNR aviation resources now. And it has been a game changer in the communities. Fire chief after fire chief says this has changed it. So having more resources and being able to quickly activate them has made the difference.
No, I can't disagree with you, and I'm really hoping our legislature is not short-sighted this year around exclusive use contracts and the aerial suppression, because I know, I track where the aircraft are and stuff during fire season, and it's just obvious watching it and seeing where they're at, where they're able to respond to. And you're right, wildfire is one of those things, you can pay me now or you can pay me later, but either way you are going to pay. But if you pay early, it's usually a lot cheaper than in the end. And and I think that's, from my perspective, having actually been in the fire program, I think DNR was wrongly labeled with the do not respond, because they responded with the resources they had, which was extremely limited given the scope and scale of, Carlton Complex. I remember talking to a couple of DNR foresters that responded, initial attack on that fire the day it started. And within about 2.5 hours, they were out of the fire district, DNR, anybody that was within a reasonable response time was tied up on a fire start. They were out of resources. And by the end of that first 24-hour burning period, not only were they out of resources, but the resources they had were exhausted. So having those, having the bigger resources, having the aerial suppression, to me is just, it's critical. So many things, if we want to, preserve human life, preserve infrastructure. Oh, wait, keep smoke and carbon out of the atmosphere.
Is our forest actually forested?
Yes, exactly. It's amazing how, maybe we should be a little more forward thinking around some of that, rather than just being reactive to, oh, there's a fire, like you said, and then going. So
I'll just say story was, back to Joel Kretz. He told me about Carlton Complex, like he could barely get a plane or two, right? If that, right? There were there, but it was just, as you said, there were so few, and they can only do so much when the fires are so big and you have so many fires, right? And I remember it was last year. And he calls me and he's like, we got a problem. And then he's pulling a joke. He's like, I got 15 planes all flying right now. I've never seen an arsenal like this here in Washington. And I was like, yeah, we've changed. And that's the thing. What we have is we have enough resources to fight the big. You're always going to have a number of big catastrophic fires until we get our forest and landscape more resilient and healthier, right? You're going to have that. I mean, just look through the central part of our state where our evergreen state is a rust brown or a gray zone, right? We're going to have those fires. What that means is you need to have enough air resources fighting the fires on the big ones, but still enough that you can pull away for initial attack for all those spot fires so they don't get so big. And that's what's great. The numbers prove it. Ever since House Bill 1168 and exclusive use contracts, we have been able to keep in the last 4 years 95% of our fires below 10 acres. And the hardest part is I can't tell you how many lives that's saved. I can't tell you how many homes that's saved. I can't tell you what that's meant for our firefighters and their mental and physical health. I can't tell you what it's helped for our economy. And I can't tell you really how it's helped our environment, because people go, well, how would you know it would get big? We know that they're going to get big because we've seen what happens when we let them burn. And if I could just pivot to forest restoration, because I think that's one of the key parts of this is we didn't just come at it like more money for wildfire. We did it as a one in the same. Like, you can't fix our wildfire crisis if you're not also having the resources to fight wildfires and be prepared. And the other leg of the stool, which is restoring the health of our landscapes, our forests, to be more resilient fire, because they can fight these fires naturally when they're healthy. And then the third leg of the stool is empowering our communities with the tools that's going to help them harden their homes and their neighborhoods. And that's how I wrote House Bill 1168. So it had all three. Now, some people said to me, DNR doesn't do community resilience, Hilary. What are you doing? And I'm like, if we don't, that's a failure, because we should, right? And the same is true. DNR only manages our 2 million acres of forest. We can't help with the federal government. We can't help. And I'm like, that is the wrong attitude. We have to, and we are capable. And one of the things I'm most thrilled by is the work that we did on federal lands. We really took an approach on forest health that wasn't like, we're just going to take care of our own because it's easy. People go, we don't do federal land work. We don't do. And I was like, just because we don't doesn't mean we shouldn't. If we have the expertise, the experience, the resources, our borders are so close to their borders. Most of our state lands border federal lands. They're going to burn if the feds aren't able to restore the health of their forests. And if we already have boots on the ground doing the work on our lands, then we should just walk across the little property line and start to help them with theirs. And that will also then help build that economy that we need of infrastructure, from the mills and the cross-laminated mass timber to the biomass and the biochar facilities that are going to take those materials and turn them to product and make it more affordable for us to do this.
I can't agree more. And I will say, your competitive spirit, for those that are watching that don't know, Hilary started out her early life as a competitive ice skater. I always took that to heart, because that always told me how you were going to react and how you were going to manage things. Because let's face it, ice skaters fall down, pick themselves back up, right? But yeah, I think that competitive spirit, my assessment is DNR started out when Good Neighbor Authority and a lot of this working on federal lands, started out third or fourth in the Pacific Northwest. And I, am excited and always proud, because my members and, just my career works very closely with getting that work done. But my assessment is Washington State and DNR is number one. I mean, they're in the lead. People look to Washington State as, the model. So to me, I think that that's very important, and has worked to set our forests, both federal, state, and really private, because as you said, the fires are really good at starting on federal lands and burning off onto other lands, sets them up for a different future rather than, 100 years of fire suppression that is what's driving a lot of this is fuel loads and changing climate. So
Well, and I think one of the things that helped us to go faster, and if if there's any piece of information, sort of as we are now having to rapidly accelerate our work, given the wildfire crisis, on federal lands as well as state and local and private and tribal lands, is that context that I started off our conversation with about we bring a sense of walking in the shoes of business. And because we are also a business, right? We generate hundreds of millions of dollars in a diverse portfolio of lands for forest, agriculture, aquatics, and commercial and residential, industrial. It's enabled us for us to make our federal Good Neighbor Authority program actually not just survive and get by, but actually thrive, right? And again, this is to the leadership of the people in my agency who are amazing, right? But we started by actually building a revolving loan fund. We know money from the government comes and goes, state and federal, right? We see it.
yep.
Deficits, right? You can't rely on always having it there. We knew that we can't make this, oh, we're going to live in 2-year increments and hope that we're going to get the problem solved. So we built a revolving loan fund. So the work we do on state lands would fund on forest health restoration. It's going to fund this fund so that it'll continue to be able to keep on restoring our state. And we did the same thing with our Good Neighbor, our federal lands work. And just for your listeners, I mean, we do a diversity of federal lands work. We did everything from forest health restoration to culvert fish passage barrier removal to elk and mule deer habitat to recreation, hiking trails, and road improvement so they're not washing away into our stream beds and rivers. And what our people were able to do is when they went in to do a federal project, they understood how to get that project done that's going to get the largest bang for the environment and the health of our forest ecosystem and biodiversity and fish and wildlife habitat, and also make money. Right. And some of the most amazing things is we've been able to build up this fund because we bring that acumen around ecosystem services and the value of our environment, coupled with how the economy works, that you're not going to have an entity that's willing to do that project if they're not going to break even or make some money, right?
Yep.
The mill needs to know they're going to only want certain types of wood and value wood, or we need to bring in like we've now launched our first biochar facility in Washington State, broke ground, right? That's going to take our slash piles and turn to clean energy, but also this amazing char. The same with, biomass facilities, right? And I think because we get that ecosystem of what is needed to make sure that our materials go to a product and create value out in the world, that we can design our projects so that they actually get the full bang of return from the environment to the community, to the economy.
Yeah, no, that's, kind of down in the weeds, the behind the curtain side of it. There's projects the Forest Service couldn't move forward on because they were economically not viable. And, DNR staff comes in, looks at it. And, I happen to know in a few cases, they went back to the Forest Service and said, great idea, but you can't afford this. And if you want to do all this other good work, sorry, we'll have to find another venue. And eventually, usually DNR is pretty good using the receipts from one Good Neighbor project to go fund the non-revenue generating stuff. But, to me, that was a huge value that I think DNR brought to the table of really understanding that business side of it. There's a project along I-90 that, be honest with you, for the purchasing community was not a winner. But, back to those relationships, the DNR staff got the purchasing community out there, got the Forest Service out there, and we all basically agreed, what? This needs to move forward in some manner to show a win. And, I think it broke even. But the important thing was we showed that it could be done, and it took a loser of a forest service timber sale and made it into something that actually enhanced roads for recreation, created some wood fiber into the mills and some jobs. And hopefully helped set the forest on a little better health trajectory for the future. So it's amazing when you put your mind to it, what you can get done.
You brought up my ice skating background, which doesn't necessarily come up in forestry at all. But I will say there's like I have two things that I've learned in ice skating. You brought up the falling one, right? It's like, you know, I didn't know this until I got into government. I think there's so much a context of fear in government, right? You're sort of like damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, right? You're either like you're gonna make somebody mad, you're gonna, right? And so there's this sense that you almost get frozen, paralyzed, right? And that's one of the things when I came in the ages, I'm like, how many things had just been like stuck for a long time, right? That was holding back our ability to deliver results for our communities and the environment, the economy, and holding people with incredible talent within our agency from bringing their full breadth of who they are and what they're capable of to really bring positive impact. And it's sort of that context where I said to my people right from the beginning, I'm like, if you're standing still, you're failing yourself, you're failing the agency, you're failing the people of Washington State. You got to take a step forward. I'm going to tell you, you're going to fall down. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to fall down a lot. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to get back up. I'm going to dust myself off. I'm going to show enormous humility and say, I'm sorry, which I've done to you, Matt. I've apologized. It's like, I messed up. I learned my lesson and now I'm back up. Now let's try to get it right. Right. And there's no mistakes in life. There's only lessons to be learned. And one of the greatest things ice skating did is you never landed a triple. I could never land a triple without falling on my butt 1,000 times. And at every one, I go, I'm one more closer to landing that triple, right? And if we as a public can start to show that kind of support for governments as we want you to take risk. We want you to step forward and try things that are going to make people mad or frighten people. If you do it from a place of, I want to make the world better, I want to help serve the people, then you're going with the right place. And if you do it with a sense of listening to a large group of people who are diverse in thought and experience, you'll be eventually able to really challenge the status quo of like what's broken and not working or stuck and create profound difference that change lives, change the environment like we've done in wildfire and forest restoration, change the economies truly in a good way. That was one of the greatest things I learned. And I just was shocked how much government lives in a place of fear. I remember on the Habitat Conservation Plan, right, which is 25 years was stuck, right? And I remember two of my people going, Hilary, this is really hard. It's really hard. And I said, okay, hold on. The Syrian refugee crisis, now that is hard because it was going on at the same time. That is hard. Us finishing an HCP is not that hard. And they go, oh, now that you put it in that perspective, you're right. I go, this is easy. Let's get her done right now. I made some people mad. You and I both know that. Oh, yeah. I did some people, right? Like you can't give everybody what they want. But what I did is I brought the breadth of knowledge and experience and voices with myself and the board trying to make the best path forward so we weren't continuously stuck, which wasn't good for communities or the environment or the economy. I think my last motto for ice skating, always avoid a crowbar and carry a blade. You'll win.
Yes, yeah, that is true. So, well, hey, this has been fun, but I know both of us are rapidly approaching other commitments here this afternoon. So, just anything, I want to thank you for your time. I think it would be great if we could schedule another one of these. There are some more meaty things I would love to dig into.
I'm not afraid of anything. So yes, we can do that.
All right. So, well, thank you for joining me, and we'll look forward to scheduling another time.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's great to see you again. It's been a while, and thanks for your leadership.
Thank you.